Alright, guys, it is time for another recording. Also, I'm using my other camera this time because, as usual, I don't know exactly what I want to do. But I think this is what I'm going to stick with because I do like using this. This is my GoPro 9 that I'm using as a webcam. It's way faster and easier to set up than the DSLR I have. And the DSLR isn't really made for video. I mean, it can take videos, but it's usually way better in like very lit spaces and just for like photography and stuff like that. Or it works better as a webcam like close up when I'm like playing games and stuff like that. For a more like wide area like this, especially an area that's not like very well lit, it doesn't work quite as well because it has to focus on so much more. Anyway, once again, I am starting off this book reading, explaining a lot of things to you when you just wanted hear more of what's going on here. So yeah, let's get started with more Reaper Man. Miss Flitworth's shouting jolted him upright, and to his momentary relief, still went on. The barn door slammed open. "Bill, come down quick!" He swung his legs onto the ladder. "What is happening, Miss Flitworth?" Something's on fire!" They ran across the yard and out onto the road. The sky over the village was red. Come on! "But it is not our fire." "It's going to be everyone's. It spreads like crazy on thatch." They reached the apology for a town square. The inn was already well alight, the thatch roaring starward in a million twisting sparks. "Look at everyone standing around," snarled Miss Flitworth. The pump buckets are everywhere. Why don't people think?" There was a scuffle a little way as a couple of his customers tried to stop Lifton from running into the building. He was screaming at them. "The girl's still in there," said Miss Flitworth. "Is that what he said?" "Yes." Flames curtained every upper window. "There's got to be some way," said Miss Flitworth. "Maybe we could go find a ladder." "We should not." "What? We've got to try. We can't leave people in there." "You don't understand," said Bildor. "To tinker with the fate of one individual could destroy the whole world." Miss Flitworth looked at him as if he had gone mad. "What kind of garbage is that?" "I mean that there's a time for everyone to die." She stared. Then she drew her hand back and gave him a ringing slap across the face. He was harder than she'd expected. She yelped and sucked at her knuckles. "You leave my farm tonight, Mr. Bildor," she growled. "Understand?" Then she turned on her heel and ran towards the pump. Some of the men had brought long hooks to drag the burning thatch off the roof. Miss Flitworth organized a team to get a ladder up to one of the bedroom windows, but by the time a man was persuaded to climb it from the steaming protection of damp blanket, the top of the ladder was already smoldering. Bildor watched the flames. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the golden timer. The firelight glowed redly on the glass. He put it away again. Part of the roof fell in. Squeak. Bildor looked down. A small robed figure marched between his legs and strutted into the flaming doorway. Someone was yelling something about barrels of brandy. Bildor reached back into his pocket and took out the timer again. Its hissing drowned out the roar of the flames. The future flowed into the past, and there was a lot more past than there was future, but he was struck by the fact that what it flowed through all the time was now. He replaced it carefully. Death knew that to tinker with the fate of one individual could destroy the whole world. He knew this. The knowledge was built into him. To Bildor, he realized, it was so much horse elbows. "Ugh, damn," he said, and walked into the fire. It's me, librarian," said Wendell, trying to shout through the keyhole. "Wendell Poons." He tried hammering some more. "Why won't he answer?" "Don't know," said a voice behind him. "Schleppel?" "Yes, Mr. Poons." "Why are you behind me?" "I've got to be behind something, Mr. Poons. That's what being a boogeyman is all about." "Librarian," said Wendell, hammering some more. "Ook." "Why won't you let me in?" "Ook." "But I need to look something up. Ook, ook! Well, yes, I am. What's that got to do with it? Ook! That's unfair! What's he saying, Mr. Poons? You won't let me in because I'm dead. That's typical. It's the sort of thing Red Shoe is always going on about, you know. Is there anyone else that knows about Life Force? There's always Miss Cake, I suppose, but she's a bit weird. Who's Miss Cake? Then Wendell realized what Schleppel had just said. Anyway, you're a boogeyman. You never heard of Miss Cake? No. I don't suppose she's interested in magic. Anyway, Mr. Shoe says we shouldn't talk to her. She exploits dead people, he says. How? She's a medium. Well, more of a small. Really? Alright, let's go and see her. And Schleppel? Yes? It's creepy, feeling you standing behind me the whole time. I get very upset if I'm not behind something, Mr. Poons. Can't you lurk behind something else? What do you suggest, Mr. Poons? Wendell thought about it. Yes, it might work, he said quietly, if I can find a screwdriver. Moto the gardener was on his knees mulching the dahlias when he heard a rhythmic scraping and thumping behind him, such as might be made by someone trying to move a heavy object. He turned his head. Evening, Mr. Poons. Still dead, I see. Evening, Moto. You've got the place looking very nice. There's someone moving a door along behind you, Mr. Poons. Yes, I know. The door edged cautiously along the path. As it passed Moto, it pivoted awkwardly, as if whoever was carrying it was trying to keep as much behind it as possible. It's a kind of security door, said Wendell. He paused. There was something wrong. He couldn't quite be certain what it was, but there was suddenly a lot of wrongness about, like hearing one note out of tune in an orchestra. He audited the view in front of him. What's that you're putting the weeds into? He said. Moto glanced at the thing beside him. Good, isn't it? He said. I found it by the compost heaps. My wheelbarrow broke, and I looked up, and there... I've never seen anything like it before, said Wendell. Who'd want to make a big basket out of wire? And those wheels don't look big enough. But it pushes along well by the handle, said Moto. I'm amazed anyone would want to throw it away. Why would anyone want to throw away something like this, Mr. Poons? Wendell stared at the trolley. He couldn't escape the feeling that it was watching him. He heard himself say, maybe it got there by itself. That's right, Mr. Poons. It wanted a bit of peace, I expect, said Moto. You are a one. Yes, said Wendell unhappily. It rather looks that way. He stepped out of the city, aware of the scraping and thumping of the door behind him. If someone had told me a month ago, he thought, that a few days later after I died I'd be walking along the road followed by a bashful boogeyman hiding behind a door, why, I'd have laughed at them. No, I wouldn't. I'd have said, and what? And speak up, and wouldn't have understood anyway. Beside him, someone barked. A dog was watching him. It was a very large dog. In fact, the only reason it could be called a dog and not a wolf is that everyone knew you didn't get wolves in the cities. It winked. Wendell thought, no full moon last night. Lupine, he ventured. The dog nodded. Can you talk? The dog shook its head. So, what do you do now? Lupine shrugged. Well, want to come with me? There was another shrug that almost vocalized the thought, why not? What else have I got to do? If someone had told me a month ago, Wendell Poons thought, that a few days later after I died, I'd be walking along the road followed by a bashful boogeyman hiding behind a door and accompanied by a kind of negative version of a werewolf, why, I probably would have laughed at them. After they repeated themselves a few times, of course, in a loud voice. The death of rats rounded up the last of his clients, many of whom had been in the thatch, and led the way through the flames toward wherever it was that good rats went. He was surprised to pass a burning figure forcing its way through the incandescent mess of collapsed beams and crumbling floorboards. As it mounted the blazing stairs, it removed something from the disintegrated remains of its clothing and held it carefully in its teeth. The death of rats did not wait to see what happened next. While it was, in some respects, as ancient as the first proto-rat, It was also less than a day old and still feeling its way as a death. And it was possibly aware that a deep thumping noise that was making the building shake was the sound of brandy starting to boil in its barrels. The thing about boiling brandy is that it doesn't boil for long. The fireball dropped bits of the inn half a mile away. White-hot flames erupted from the holes where the doors and windows had been. The walls exploded. Burning rafters whirred overhead. Some buried themselves in the neighboring roofs, starting more fires. What was left was just an eye-watering glow, and then little pools of shadow within the glow. They moved and ran together and formed the shape of a tall figure striding forward, carrying something in front of it. It passed through the blistered crowd and trudged up the cool dark road towards the farm. The people picked themselves up and followed it, moving through the dusk like the tail of a dark comet. Bill Dorr climbed the stairs to Miss Flitworth's bedroom and laid the child on the bed. She said there was an apothecary somewhere near here. Miss Flitworth pushed her way through the crowd at the top of the stairs. There's one in Chambly, she said, but there's a witch over Lancre Way. No witches, no magic. Send for him, and everyone else go away. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't even a command. It was simply an irrefutable statement. Miss Flitworth waved her skinny arms at the people. Come on, it's all over. Shoo, you're all in my bedroom. Go on, get out. How'd he do it? Said someone at the back of the crowd. No one could have got out of there alive. We saw it all blow up. Bill Dorr turned around slowly. We hid, he said, in the cellar. There, see? Said Miss Flitworth. In the cellar. Makes sense. But the inn hasn't got... The doubter began and stopped. Bill Dorr was glaring at him. In the cellar, he corrected himself. Yeah, right. Clever. Very clever, said Miss Flitworth. Now, get along with the lot of you. He heard her shoo them down the stairs back into the night. The door slammed. He didn't hear her come back up the stairs with a bowl of cold water and flannel. Miss Flitworth could walk lightly, too, when she had a mind to. She came in and shut the door behind her. Her parents will want to see her, she said. Her mom's in a faint, and Big Henry from the mill knocked her dad out when he tried to run into the flames, but they'll be here directly. She bent down and ran the flannel over the girl's forehead. Where was she? She was hiding in a cupboard. From a fire? Bill Dorr shrugged. I'm amazed you could find anyone in all that heat and smoke, she said. I suppose you would call it a knack. And not a mark on her. Bill Dorr ignored the question in her voice. Did you send someone from the apothecary? Yes. He must not take anything away. What do you mean? Stay here when he comes. You must not take anything out of this room. That's silly. Why should he take anything? What would he want to take? It is very important. And now I must leave you. Where are you going? To the barn. There are things I must do. There may not be much time now. Miss Flitworth stared at the small figure on the bed. She felt far out of her depth, and all she could do was tread water. She looks as if she's sleeping, she said helplessly. What's wrong with her? Bill Dorr paused at the top of the stairs. She is living on borrowed time, he said. There was an old forge behind the barn. It hadn't been used for years, but now the red and yellow light spilled out into the yard, pulsing like a heart. And like a heart, there was a regular thumping. With every crash, the light flared blue. Miss Flitworth sidled through the open doorway. If she was the kind of person who would swear, she would have sworn that she made no noise that could possibly be heard above the cackle of the fire and the hammering, but Bill Dorr spun around in a half-crouch, holding a curved blade in front of him. It's me! He relaxed, or at least moved, into a different level of tension. What the hell are you doing? He looked at the blade in his hands, as if he was seeing it for the first time. I thought I would sharpen the scythe, Miss Flitworth. At 1 o'clock in the morning? He looked at it blankly. It's just as blunt at night, Miss Flitworth. Then he slammed it down on the anvil. And I can't sharpen it enough. I think perhaps the heat has got to you, she said, and reached out and took his arms. Besides, it looks sharp enough to, she began and paused. Her fingers moved on the bone of his arm. They pulled away for a moment and then closed again. Bildor shivered. Miss Flitworth didn't hesitate for long. In 75 years she had dealt with wars, famine, innumerable sick animals, a couple of epidemics, and thousands of tiny, everyday tragedies. A depressed skeleton wasn't even in the top 10 worst things she had seen. So it is you, she said. Miss Flitworth, I always knew that you would come one day. I think perhaps that... I spent most of my life waiting for a night on a white charger. Miss Flitworth grinned. Joke's on me, huh? Bildor sat down on the anvil. The apothecary came, she said. He said he couldn't do anything. He said she was fine. We just couldn't wake her up. And, it took us ages to get her hand open. She had it closed so tightly. I said nothing was to be taken. It's all right. We left her holding it. Good. What was it? My time. Sorry? My time. The time of my life. It looks like an egg timer for very expensive eggs. Bildor looked surprised. Yes, in a way, I have given her some of my time. How come you need time? Every living thing needs time, and when it runs out, they die. When it runs out, she will die, and I will die too, in a few hours. But you can't! I can. It's hard to explain. Move up. What? I said move up. I want to sit down. Bildor made space on the anvil. Miss Flitworth sat down. So, you're going to die, she said. Yes. And you don't want to? No. Why not? He looked at her as if she was mad. Because then there will be nothing. Because I won't exist. Is that what happens for humans, too? I don't think so. It's different for you. You have it all better organized. They both sat watching the fading glow of the coals in the forge. So, what were you working on the scythe blade for? Said Miss Flitworth. I thought perhaps I could fight back. Has it ever worked? With you, I mean. Not usually. Sometimes people challenge me to a game. For their lives, Do they ever win? No. Last year, someone got 3 streets and all the utilities. What? What sort of game is that? I don't recall. Exclusion possession, I think. I was the boot. Just a moment, said Miss Flitworth. If you're you, who will be coming for you? Death. Last night, this was pushed under the door. Death opened his hand to reveal a small, grubby piece of paper on which Miss Flitworth could read, with some difficulty, the word ooey ooey ooey. I have received the badly written note of the Banshee. Miss Flitworth looked at him, with her head on the side. But, correct me if I'm wrong, but... The new Death. Bildor picked up the blade. He will be terrible. The blade twisted in his hands. Blue light flickered along its edge. I will be the first. Miss Flitworth stared at the light as if fascinated. Exactly how terrible? How terrible can you imagine? Oh. Exactly as terrible as that. The blade tilted this way and that. And for the child, too, said Miss Flitworth. Yes. I don't reckon I owe you any favors, Mr. Dorr. I don't reckon anyone in the whole world owes you any favors. You may be right. Mind you, life's got 1 or 2 things to answer for, too. Fair's fair. I cannot say. Miss Flitworth gave him another long, appraising look. There's a pretty good grindstone in the corner, she said. I've used it. And there's an oil stone in the cupboard. I've used that, too. She thought she could hear a sound as the blade moved, a sort of faint whine of tensed air. And it's still not sharp enough. Bildor sighed. It may never be sharp enough. Come on, man, no sense giving in, said Miss Flitworth. Where there's life, eh? Where there's life, what? There's hope? Is there? Right enough. Bildor ran a bony finger along the edge. Hope? Got anything else left to try? Bill shook his head. He tried a number of emotions. But this was a new one. Could you fetch me a steel? It was an hour later. Miss Flitworth sorted through her rag bag. What's next? She said. What have we had so far? Let's see. Hessian, calico, linen. How about satin? Here's a piece. Bildor took the rag and wiped it gently across the blade. Miss Flitworth reached the bottom of the bag and pulled out a swatch of white cloth. Yes? Silk, she said softly. Finest white silk, the real stuff, never worn. She sat back and stared at it. After a while, he took it tactfully from her fingers. Thank you. Well now, she said, waking up, that's it, isn't it? When he turned the blade, it made a noise like whom. The fires of the forge were barely alive now, but the blade glowed with razor light. Sharpened on silk, said Miss Flitworth. Who'd believe it? And still blunt. Bildor looked around in the dark forge and then darted into a corner. What have you found? Cobweb. There was a long, thin whine, like the torturing of ants. Any good? Still too blunt. She watched Bildor stride out of the forge and scuttled after him. He went and stood in the middle of the yard, holding the scythe blade edge on to the faint dawn breeze. It hummed. How sharp can a blade get, for goodness sake? It can get sharper than this. Down in his hen house, Cyril the cockerel awoke and stared blearily at the treacherous letters chalked on the board. He took a deep breath. Flew a cockle dod! Bildor glanced at the rimward horizon and then, speculatively, at the little hill behind the house. He jerked forward, legs clicking over the ground. The new daylight sloshed onto the world. Discworld light is old, slow, and heavy. It roared across the landscape like a cavalry charge. The occasional valley slowed it for a moment, and here and then, a mountain range banked it up until it poured over the top and down the far slope. It moved across the sea, surged up the beach, and accelerated over the plains, driven by the lash of the sun. On the fabled hidden continent of XXXX, somewhere near the rim, there's a lost colony of wizards who wear corks around their pointy hats and live on nothing but prawns. There the light is still wild and fresh as it rolls in from space, and they surf on the boiling interference between night and day. If one of them had carried thousands of miles inland on the dawn, he might have seen, as the light thundered over the high plains, a stick figure toiling up a low hill in the path of the morning. It reached the top a moment before the light arrived, took a breath, and then spun around in a crouch, grinning. It held a long blade upright between extended arms. Light struck, split, slid. Not that the wizard would have paid much attention, because he'd be too busy worrying about the 5,000-mile walk back home. Miss Flitworth panted up as the new day streamed past. Bildor was absolutely still, only the blade moving between his fingers as he angled it against the light. Finally, he seemed satisfied. He turned around and swished it experimentally through the air. Miss Flitworth stuck her hands on her hips. "Oh, come on," she said. "No one can sharpen anything on daylight." She paused. He waved the blade again. "Good grief." Down the yard, Cyril stretched his bald neck for another go. Bildor grinned and swung the blade towards the sound. "Sud and oodle fod." Then he lowered the blade. Just so you know, it's hard to tell, but if you look at the words, basically, the scythe is so sharp that it's cutting words. It's hard to translate that into speaking, but hopefully I did a good enough job for you guys. That's sharp. His grin faded, or at least faded as much as it was able to. Miss Flitworth turned, following the line of his gaze until it intersected a faint haze over the cornfields. It looked like a pale gray robe, empty, but still somehow maintaining the shape of its wearer, as if a garment on a washing line was catching the breeze. It wavered for a moment, and then it vanished. "I saw it," said Miss Flitworth. "That wasn't it. That was them." "Them who?" "They're like..." Bildor waved a hand vaguely. "Servants, watchers, auditors, inspectors." Miss Flitworth's eyes narrowed. "Inspectors? You mean like the revenue?" she said. "I suppose so." Miss Flitworth's face lit up. "Why didn't you say?" "I'm sorry." "My father always made me promise never to help the revenue. Even just thinking about the revenue," he said, "made him want to go and have a lie down. He said that there was death and taxes was worse, because at least death didn't happen to you every year. We had to go out of the room when he really got started about the revenue. Nasty creatures, always poking around asking what you've got hidden under the woodpile behind the secret panels in the cellar, and other stuff which is no concern whatsoever of anyone." She sniffed. Bildor was impressed. Miss Flitworth could actually give the word revenue, which had 2 vowels and 1 diphthong, all the preemptoriness of the word scum. "You should have said that they were after you right from the start," said Miss Flitworth. "The revenue aren't popular in these parts, you know. In my father's day, any revenuer came around here prying about by himself, we used to tie weights to their feet and heave them into the pond." "But the pond is only a few inches deep, Miss Flitworth." "Yeah, but it was fun watching them find out. You should have said. Everyone thought you were to do with taxes." "No, not taxes." Well, I didn't know there was a revenue up there, too." "Yes, in a way." She sidled closer. "When will he come?" "Tonight. I cannot be exact. 2 people are living on the same timer. It makes things uncertain." "I didn't know people could give people some of their time." "It happens all the time." "And you're sure about tonight?" "Yes." "And that blade will work, will it?" "I don't know. It's a 1,000,000 to 1 chance." "Oh." She seemed to be considering something. "So you've got the rest of the day free, then?" "Yes." "Then you can start getting the harvest in." "What?" "That'll keep you busy. Keep your mind off things. Besides, I'm paying you 6 pence a week, and 6 pence is 6 pence. Miss Cake's house was also in Elm Street. Wendell knocked on the door. After a while, a muffled voice called out, "Is there anybody there?" "Knock once for yes," Schleppel volunteered. Schleppel. Wendell levered open the letterbox. "Excuse me, Miss Cake." The door opened. Miss Cake wasn't what Wendell had expected. She was big, but not in the sense of being fat. She was just built to a scale slightly larger than normal. Sort of person who goes through life crouching slightly and looking apologetic in case they inadvertently loom. And she had magnificent hair. It crowned her head and flowed out behind her like a cloak. She also had slightly pointed ears and teeth which, while white and quite beautiful, caught the light in a disturbing way. Wendell was amazed at the speed at which his heightened zombie senses reached a conclusion. He looked down. Lupine was sitting bolt upright too excited even to wag his tail. "I don't think you could be Miss Cake," said Wendell. "You want Mother," said the tall girl. "Mother, there's a gentleman." A distant muttering became a closer muttering, and then Miss Cake appeared around the side of her daughter like a small moon emerging from a planetary shadow. "What do you want?" said Miss Cake. Wendell took a step backward. Unlike her daughter, Miss Cake was quite short and almost perfectly circular. And still, unlike her daughter, whose whole stance was dedicated to making herself look small, she loomed tremendously. This was largely because of her hat, which he later learned she wore at all times with the dedication of a wizard. It was huge and black and had things on it, like bird wings and wax cherries and hat pins. Carmen Miranda could have worn that hat to the funeral of a continent. Miss Cake traveled underneath it, as the basket travels under a balloon. People often found themselves talking to her hat. "Miss Cake?" said Wendell, fascinated. "I'm down here," said a reproachful voice. Wendell lowered his gaze. "That's who I am," said Miss Cake. "Am I addressing Miss Cake?" said Wendell. "Yes, I know," said Miss Cake. "My name's Wendell Poons." "I knew that too. I'm a wizard, you see." "All right, but see that you wipes your feet. May I come in?" Wendell Poons paused. He replayed the last few lines of conversation in the clicking control room of his brain. And then he smiled. "That's right," said Miss Cake. "Are you by any chance a natural clairvoyant?" About 10 seconds usually, Mr. Poons." Wendell hesitated. You gotta ask the questions," said Miss Cake quickly. "I gets a migraine if people goes and viciously not to ask questions after I've already foreseen them and answered them." "How far into the future can you see, Miss Cake?" She nodded. "Right then," she said, apparently mollified, and led the way through the hall into a tiny sitting room. "And the bogey can come in, only he's got to leave his door outside and go in the cellar. I don't hold with bogeys wandering around the house." "Gosh, it's been ages since I've been in a proper cellar," said Schleppel. "It's got spiders in it," said Miss Cake. "Wow!" "And you'd like a cup of tea," said Miss Cake to Wendell. Someone else might have said, "I expect you'd like a cup of tea," or "Do you want a cup of tea?" But this was a statement. "Yes, please," said Wendell. "I'd love a cup of tea." "You shouldn't," said Miss Cake. "That stuff rots your teeth." Wendell worked this one out. "2 sugars, please," he said. "It's all right." "This is a nice place you have here, Miss Cake," said Wendell, his mind racing. Miss Cake's habit of answering questions while they were still forming in your mind taxed the most active brain. "He's been dead for 10 years, she said. Said Wendell, but the question was already there in his larynx. "I trust Mr. Cake is in good health?" "It's okay. I speaks to him occasional," said Miss Cake. "I'm sorry to hear that," said Wendell. "All right, if that makes you feel better. Miss Cake, I'm finding it a little confusing. Can you switch off your precognition?" She nodded. "Sorry, I gets into the habit of leaving it on," she said. What with there being only me and Ludmilla and one-man bucket, he's a ghost," she added. "I knew you was going to ask that." "Yes, I've heard that mediums have native spirit guides." "Him? He's not a guide. He's sort of an odd-job ghost," said Miss Cake. "I don't hold it against you. With all that stuff and the cards and trumpets and oojar boards behind you. And I think ectoplasm's disgusting. I won't have it in the house. I won't. You can't get it out of the carpets, you know, not even with vinegar." "My word," said Wendell Poons. "Or whaling. I don't hold with it. Or messing around with the supernatural. It's unnatural. The supernatural. I won't have it." Said Wendell cautiously. "There are those who might think that being a medium is a bit, supernatural." What? Nothing supernatural about dead people. Load of nonsense. Everyone dies sooner or later." "I do hope so, Miss Cake." "So what is it you be wanting, Mr. Poons? I'm not precogniting, so you're going to have to tell me." "I want to know what's happening, Miss Cake." There was a muted thump from under their feet and the faint, happy sound of Schleppel. "Oh, wow, rats too." "I went up and tried to tell you wizards," said Miss Cake primly, "and no one listened. I knew they weren't going to, but I had to try, otherwise I wouldn't have known." "Who did you speak to?" "The big one with the red dress and a mustache like he's trying to swallow a cat." "Ah, the Arch-Chancellor," said Wendell positively. "And there was a huge fat one, walks like a duck." He does, doesn't he? "That was the Dean," said Wendell. "They called me their good woman," said Miss Cake. "They told me to go about my business. Don't see why I shouldn't be going around helping wizards who call me a good woman when I was only trying to help. I'm afraid wizards don't listen often, said Wendell. I've never listened for 130 years. Why not? In case I heard what rubbish I was saying I expect. What's happening, Miss Cake? You can tell me. I may be a wizard, but I'm a dead one. Well, Schleppel told me it was all due to life force. It's building up, see? What does it mean? There's more of it than there should be. You get... She waved her hands around vaguely. When things are like in scales, only not same on the both sides. Imbalance? Miss Cake, who looked as though she was reading a distant script, nodded. One of those things, yeah? See, sometimes it just happens a little bit, and all you get is ghosts, because the life is not in the body anymore, but hasn't gone. You get less in the winter because it sort of drains away, and then it comes back in the spring, and some things concentrate it. Moto, the university gardener, hummed a little tune as he wheeled the strange trolley into his private little area between the library and the high-energy magic building, with a load of weeds bound for compost hood. Oh, and this is a little bit about the high-energy magic building. The only building on the campus less than 1,000 years old, the senior wizards have never bothered much about what the younger, skinnier, and more bespectacled wizards were up to in there, treating their endless requests for funding for atomic particle accelerators and radiation shielding as one treats pleas for more pocket money, and listening with amusement to their breathless accounts of the search for elementary particles of magic itself. This may one day turn out to be a major error on the part of the senior wizards, especially if they do let the younger wizards build whatever that blasted thing is they want to keep building out in the squash court. The senior wizards know that the proper purpose of magic is to form a social pyramid with the wizards on top of it, eating big dinners, but in fact the HEM building has helped provide one of the rarest foods in the universe, antipasta. Ordinary pasta is prepared for some hours before being eaten. Antipasta is created some hours after the meal, whereupon it then exists backwards in time, and if properly prepared, should arrive on the taste buds at exactly the same moment, thus creating a true taste explosion. It costs $5,000 a forkful, or a little more if you include the cost of cleaning the tomato sauce off the walls afterward. There seemed to be a lot of excitement around at the moment. It was certainly interesting working with all these wizards. Teamwork, that's what it was. They looked after the cosmic balance, the universal harmonies, and the dimensional equilibriums, and he saw to it that the aphids stayed off the roses. There was a metallic tinkle. He peered over the top of the heap of weeds. Another one! A gleaming metal wire basket on little wheels sat on the path. Maybe the wizards had bought it for him. The first one was quite useful, although it was a little bit hard to steer. The little wheels seemed to want to go in different directions. There was probably a knack. Well, this one would be handy for carrying seed trays in. He pushed the second trolley aside and heard behind him a sound which, if it had been written down, he would probably have written down as glop. He turned around, saw the biggest of the compost heaps pulsating in the dark, and said, "Look what I have brought you for your tea." And then he saw that it was moving. Some places, too, said Miss Cake. But why should it build up? Said Wendell. It's like a thunderstorm, see? You know how you get that prickly feeling before a storm. That's what's happening now. Yes, but why, Miss Cake? Oh, well, one man bucket says nothing's dying. What? Daft, isn't it? He says a lot of lives are ending, but not going away. They're just staying here. Wait, like ghosts? Not just ghosts, it's like puddles. When you get a lot of puddles, it's like the sea. Anyway, you only get ghosts from things like people. You don't get ghosts of cabbages. Wendell Poon sat back in his chair. He had a vision of a vast pool of life, a lake being fed by 1,000,000 short-lived tributaries as living things came to be at the end of their lifespan. And the life force was leaking out as the pressure built up, leaking out wherever it could. Do you think I could have stopped, or I could have a word with one? He began and then stopped. He got up and lurched over to Miss Cake's mantelpiece. How long have you had this, Miss Cake? He demanded, picking up a familiar glassy object. That? Bought it yesterday. Pretty, ain't it? Wendell shook the globe. It was almost identical to the one under his floorboards. Snowflakes whirled up and settled on an exquisite model of the unseen university. It reminded him strongly of something. Well, the building obviously reminded him of the university, but the shape of the whole thing, there was a hint of... It made him think of... breakfast? Why is it happening, he said, half to himself. These damn things are turning up everywhere. The wizards ran down the corridor. How can you kill ghosts? How should I know? The question doesn't usually arise. You, exorcise them, I think. What, jumping up and down, running on the spot, that kind of thing? The dean had been ready for this. It's spelled with an O, Arch-Chancellor. I don't think this one is expected to subject them to, physical exertion. Should think not. Don't want a lot of the healthy ghosts buzzing around. There was a blood-curdling scream. It echoed around the dark pillars and arches, and was suddenly cut off. The Arch-Chancellor stopped abruptly. The wizards cannoned into him. Sounded like a blood-curdling scream, he said. Follow me! He ran around the corner. There was a metallic crash and a lot of swearing. Something small and striped red and yellow, with tiny dripping fangs and 3 pairs of wings, flew around the corner and shot over the dean's head, making a noise like a miniature buzzsaw. Did anyone know what that was? Said the bursar faintly. The thing orbited the wizards and then disappeared into the darkness of the roof. And I wish he wouldn't swear so. Come on, said the dean. We better see what's happened to him. Must we? Said the senior wrangler. They peered around the corner. The Arch-Chancellor was sitting up, rubbing his ankle. What idiot left this here? He said. Left what? Said the dean. This blasted wire baskety wheelie thing, said the Arch-Chancellor. Beside him, a tiny purple spider-like creature materialized into the air and scuttled toward a crevice. The wizards didn't notice it. What wire baskety wheelie thing? Said the wizards in unison. Ridcully looked around him. I could have sworn, he began. There was another scream. Ridcully scrambled to his feet. Come on, you fellows, he said, limping heroically onward. Why does everyone run towards the blood-curdling scream? Mumbled the senior wrangler. It's contrary to all sense. They trotted out through the cloisters and in the quadrangle. A rounded, dark shape was squatting in the middle of an ancient lawn. Steam was coming out of it in noisome wisps. What is it? It can't be a compost heap in the middle of the lawn, can it? Moto will be very upset. The dean peered closer, especially because I do believe that's his feet poking out from under it. The heap swiveled towards the wizards and made a glop glop noise. Then it moved. Right then, said Ridcully, rubbing his hands together hopefully. Which of you fellows has got a spell about them at the moment? The wizards patted their pockets in an embarrassed fashion. Then I shall attract its attention while the bursar and the dean try to pull Moto out, said Ridcully. Oh, good, said the dean faintly. How can you attract a compost heap's attention, said the senior wrangler. I shouldn't think it's even got one. Ridcully removed his hat and stepped gingerly forward. Load of rubbish, he roared. The senior wrangler groaned and put his hand over his eyes. Ridcully flapped his hat in front of the heap. Biodegradable garbage! Poor green trash, said the lecturer in recent runes helpfully. That's the ticket, said the Arch-Chancellor. Try to infuriate the bugger. Behind him, a slightly different variety of mad, waspy creature popped out of the air and buzzed away. The heap lunged at the hat. Mitted, said Ridcully. No, I say, said the lecturer in recent runes, shocked. The dean and the bursar crept forward, grabbed a gardener's foot each and pulled. Moto slid out of the heap. It's eaten through his clothes, said the dean. But is he all right? He's still breathing, said the bursar. And if he's lucky, he's lost his sense of smell, said the dean. The heap snapped at Ridcully's hat. There was a glop. The point of the hat vanished. Hey! There was still almost half a bottle in there, Ridcully roared. The senior wrangler grabbed his arm. Come on, Arch-Chancellor! The heap swiveled and lunged towards the bursar. The wizards backed away. It can't be intelligent, can it? Said the bursar. All it's doing is moving around slowly and eating things, said the dean. Put a pointy hat on it and be a faculty member, said the Arch-Chancellor. The heap came after them. I wouldn't call that moving slowly, said the Dean. They looked expectantly at the Arch-Chancellor. Run! Portly though most of the faculty were, they hit a fair turn of speed up in the cloisters, fought one another through the door, slammed it behind them, and leaned on it. Very soon afterward, there was a damp, heavy thud on the far side. Well, we're out of that, said the Bursar. The Dean looked down. I think it's coming through the door, Arch-Chancellor, he said in a tiny voice. Don't be daft. We're all leaning on it. I didn't mean through. I mean through. The Arch-Chancellor sniffed. What's burning? Your boots, Arch-Chancellor, said the Dean. Ridcully looked down. A greenish-yellow puddle was spreading under the door. The wood was charring, the flagstones were hissing, and the leather soles of his boots were definitely in trouble. He could feel himself getting lower. He fumbled with the laces and took a standing jump onto dry flagstone. Bursar! Yes, Arch-Chancellor? Give me your boots! What? Damn it, man! I command me to give you your blasted boots! This time, a long creature with 4 pairs of wings, 2 at each end, and 3 eyes popped into existence over Ridcully's head and dropped onto his hat. But I am your Arch-Chancellor! Yes, but I think the hinges are going, said the lecturer in recent runes. Ridcully looked around desperately. We'll regroup in the Great Hall, he said. We'll strategically withdraw to previous prepared positions. We'll prepare them, said the Dean. We'll prepare them when we get there, said the Arch-Chancellor through gritted teeth. Bursar, your boots! Now! They reached the double doors of the Great Hall just as the door behind them half collapsed, half dissolved. The Great Hall's doors were much sturdier. Bolts and bars were dragged into place. Clear the table and pile them up in front of the door, snapped Ridcully. But it eats through wood, said the Dean. There was a moan from the small body of Moto, which had been propped up against a chair. He opened his eyes. Quick, said Ridcully. How can we kill a compost heap? I don't know if you can, Mr. Ridcully, sir, said the gardener. How about fire? I could probably manage a small fireball, said the Dean. It wouldn't work. Too soggy, said Ridcully. It's right outside. It's eating away at the door. It's eating away at the door, sang the lecturer in recent runes. The wizards backed further away down the length of the hall. I hope it doesn't eat too much wood, said the dazed Moto, radiating genuine concern. They're a devil, excuse my clutching, and if you get too much carbon in them, it's far too heating. You know, this is exactly the right time for a lecture on the dynamics of compost making, Moto, said the Dean. Dwarves do not know the meaning of the word irony. Well then, the correct balance of materials correctly layered according to... There goes the door, said the lecturer in recent runes, lumbering towards the rest of them. The mounds of furniture started to move forward. The Arch-Chancellor stared desperately around the hall at a loss. Then his eyes were drawn to a familiar, heavy bottle on one of the sideboards. Carbon, he said. That's like a charcoal, isn't it? How should I know? I'm not an alchemist, sniffed the Dean. The compost heap emerged from the debris. Steam poured off of it. The Arch-Chancellor looked longingly at the bottle of wow-wow sauce. He uncorked it. He took a deep sniff. The cooks here just can't make it properly, you know, he said. It'll be weeks before I can get any more from home. He tossed the bottle towards the advancing heap. It vanished into the seething mass. Stinging nettles are always useful, said Moto behind him. They add iron. And comfrey, well, you can never get enough comfrey. For the minerals, you know. Myself, I've always reckoned that a small quantity of wild yarrow... The wizards peered over at the top of an overturned table. The heap had stopped moving. Is it just me, or is it getting bigger? Said the senior wrangler. And looking happier, said the Dean. It smells awful, said the Bursar. Oh, well, that was nearly a full bottle of sauce, too, said the Arch-Chancellor sadly. I'd hardly opened it. Nature's a wonderful thing when you come to think about it, said the senior wrangler. You don't have to all glare at me like that, you know. I was only passing a remark. There are times when, Ridcully began, and then the compost heap exploded. It wasn't a bang or a boom. It was the dampest, most corpulent eruption in the history of terminal flatulence. Dark red flame, fringed with black, roared up to the ceiling. Pieces of the heap rocketed across the hall and slapped wetly into the walls. The wizards peered out from their barricade, which was now thick with tea leaves. A cabbage stalk dropped softly onto the dean's head. He looked at a small, bubbling patch on the flagstones. His face split slowly into a grin. "Wow," he said. The other wizards unfolded themselves. Adrenaline backwash worked its seductive spell. They grinned, too, and started playfully punching one another on the shoulder. "Eat hot sauce!" roared the Arch-Chancellor. "Up against the hedge, fermented rubbish! Can we kick ass, or can we kick ass?" burbled the dean happily. You mean, can't the second time, not can. And I'm not sure there's compost he's could be said to have in it. The senior wrangler began, but the tide of excitement was flowing against him. "That's one heap that won't mess with the wizards again," said the dean, who was getting carried away. "We're keen and mean, and there's 3 more of them out there, Moto says," said the bursar. They fell silent. "We could go and pick up our staffs, couldn't we?" said the dean. The Arch-Chancellor prodded a piece of exploded heap with the toe of his boot. "Dead things coming alive," he murmured. "I don't like that. What's next? Walking statues?" The wizards looked up at the statues of the dead Arch-Chancellors that lined the Great Hall, and, indeed, most of the corridors of the university. The university had been in existence for thousands of years, and the average Arch-Chancellor remained in office for about 11 months, so there were plenty of statues. "You know, I really wish you hadn't said that," said the lecturer in recent runes. "It's just a thought," said Ridcully. "Come on, let's have a look at the rest of those heaps." "Yeah," said the dean, now in the grip of a wild, unwizardly machismo. "We're mean, yeah. Are we mean?" The Arch-Chancellor raised his eyebrows and then turned to the rest of the wizards. "Are we mean?" I'm feeling reasonably mean," said the lecturer in recent runes. "I'm definitely very mean, I think," said the bursar. "It's having no boots that does it," he added. "I'll be mean if everyone else is," said the senior wrangler. The Arch-Chancellor turned back to the dean. "Yes," he said, "it appears that we are all mean." "Yo!" said the dean. "Yo, what?" said Ridcully. It's not a yo what, it's just a yo," said the senior wrangler behind him. "It's a general street greeting, and affirmative with the convivial military in-group and masculine bonding ritual overtones." "What, like jolly good?" said Ridcully. "I suppose so," said the senior wrangler, reluctantly. Ridcully was pleased. Ankh-Morpork had never offered very good prospects for hunting. He never thought it was possible to have so much fun in his own university. "Right," he said. "Let's get those heaps." "Yo, yo, yo! Yo, yo!" Ridcully sighed. "Bursar?" Yes, Arch-Chancellor? Just try to understand. All right? Okay, I think that's where we're going to end this section of reading. So things are starting to really heat up. And I hope you guys can understand, like, why I enjoy this book so much. We're definitely more than halfway through now. And yeah, it's good stuff, for sure. So I'm excited to get into more readings and all that.